If you listen to the critics, if you listen to your own doubts and call them reasons, you may never find the drive to go back to school. But a little change in direction, a new perspective, and the right program may make your successful new path a reality. The Accelerated Degree Program at Albright College. Start your degree or complete your degree one night a week in as little as 2 years. Albright College. A different way of thinking.
Good evening, and welcome to the Albright Scholar for October 2016. My name is John Pankratz. I teach history at Albright, and each month it's my privilege to welcome BCTV viewers and residents of Greater Reading to take a glimpse inside our learning community up here on North 13th Street, to look at the work being done by teachers and students, and to think about its impact on all of us. Well, it's October, it's a beautiful day, blue skies are filled with pollen, and the school year is well underway. One of the things that makes this an exciting year at Albright is the arrival of new talent, new teaching talent. I think a total of 18 colleagues, some of them visiting scholars, but some of them tenure-track professors have arrived and brought new ideas, new teaching methods, distinguished scholarly careers, and just lots of energy to the place. And I'll be introducing you to many of those new faces over the course of the coming years. Today I have two colleagues who have become friends in just the past several weeks, and I'm delighted to share them with you tonight. To my left is Mason Williams, my colleague in the Department of History. Welcome, Mason.
Thank you.
And Michael Armato, a colleague in the Department of Political Science. Michael, welcome to the Albright Scholar.
Thank you. I'm
Great to have you. History and politics. That's the other thing that's going on tonight. It is October in a year that's divisible by 4, which means that there's an election on, if you hadn't already noticed. And I thought it would be useful to have people who have thought deeply about American politics to talk a little bit about their own work, but also to put this very unusual election year into some context. So let me ask you each sort of a loaded question. Has all of your study, has all of your learning prepared you for a year such as 2016?
Yes, I think it has. I think it'll take us some time to understand the nature of the Trump phenomenon in particular. But when I look at the current election, I see two things operating, both with very deep roots, going back at least to the 1970s. One is party polarization. The parties are getting ever farther apart, ever more ideologically sorted. The other thing is rising inequality, or stagnant standards of living for the median American family. These two things are reinforcing each other in some ways. In some ways, they're cutting against each other. So I think when you place the partisanship story within the inequality story, you understand why both major parties this year are having quite severe difficulties. The Republican Party, as we speak, this is unfolding, right? The Democratic Party, too, is trying to figure out which of two ways it wants to wrestle with the changes in American society that stem from globalization and the development of our modern economic world.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the services that historians can render, to place these immediate traumas into a much longer context, and those are two deep contexts that have been around now for decades. Yeah.
So the answer is yes as well. When political scientists study the presidency, there's really 3 camps. And I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive camps. One is the study of the individual presidents.
Right.
So what's their personality, like Barbara's personality characteristics? What's this individual person like? What's his ability to persuade people or her ability to persuade people in government? Or what's their public prestige or professional reputation?
And certainly that's a view that the media pick up on because those
absolutely.
faces and those personality quirks
Absolutely.
make good television.
It absolutely does, at least certainly for their public prestige. But then what's going on behind the scenes that the media might not see? The second thing is we look at the institution of the presidency. So what policy-making tools do they have? How are checks and balances operating at that particular time? What's the Supreme Court doing? And then we look at the institution and the person in time in a American political development perspective, which I'm always fascinated to talk to historians about, or any historian about American political development, which is, what happens at a particular point in time over American history that has a lasting impact? What parts of history can we look at that make a difference? Not necessarily in a chronological order. So as I'm teaching my presidency class this semester and I'm going through those three things, as we're talking about Neustadt's famous work on individual presidents, which really anchors the study of a lot of presidential research, at least in political science, we're able to talk about what would a President Clinton or President Trump look like in this framework. When we're looking at personality characteristics, we're able to say that. When we're looking at a president's vision and a president's ability to communicate effectively, we're able to talk about the election. So I think my background has indeed prepared me for this year. My time in practical politics, I'm not sure has. But my time in the academic world, I think, yes, has prepared me.
Right. Both major party candidates are, I guess, legally New Yorkers, and
They are.
Mason, you've written about another New Yorker who became president of the United States,
yes,
FDR. I guess tell us a little bit about that work, and then if there are any lessons from the 1930s and 40s that.
Sure. So I wrote a history of the New Deal that's framed around two quite dissimilar New Yorkers. Franklin Roosevelt, the patrician, Hudson Valley country gentleman who, from very early on in his life, was aspiring to higher office, and of course does become one of the three great presidents in American history. I think most scholars would agree. The other was Fiorello LaGuardia, son of two Italian immigrants, one of whom was also Jewish. Born in Greenwich Village, moved to Arizona at a very young age, comes back to New York in his mid-20s and launches a political career, becomes the first Italian-American congressman, and in 1934, the crusading reform mayor of New York, despite the fact that he's a Republican and LaGuardia, and Roosevelt rather is a Democrat, and despite the fact that they're from such different backgrounds, they form a very consequential and close political relationship, which shapes the New Deal in New York and at the national level, and shapes New York City's politics for decades after they leave the scene. There were three New Yorkers in this presidential season, each of whom embodied a different aspect in the city in ways that I found fascinating. Bernie Sanders, who grew up in a socialist milieu in Brooklyn, basically stepped out of the pages of City of Ambition. He was the direct legacy of the style, this culture of politics that formed in New York with the labor movement in the 30s and 40s. Donald Trump came on the scene in the late 1970s, a time when the city was going through tremendously hard times, but also when the modern glamorous city, the luxury city, was starting to be born. And for him, New York provided the grandest of stages on which to perform. And he becomes this sort of iconic figure of New York in the 1980s.
Set designer of that age of excess.
Yeah. Hillary Clinton is a New Yorker by choice. She goes there obviously to pursue her Senate campaign moving to Westchester County. Bill Clinton at the same time sets up the Clinton Global Initiative in Harlem. And they adopt the city both for its multiculturalism and because it provides access. It's a world city. And they are becoming international figures. And that's what city people are in the 21st century as global citizens. So I think it's been interesting to see each of these stages of New York's history performed in this presidential season.
In this particular election. Yeah. Michael, your own work is not actually so much on the presidency, right?
No, I study several things. The project I'm most excited about is our study looking at whether and how mayors encourage civic engagement, which was published last year. So civic engagement's a very important topic to political scientists. It's how do we as citizens, how are we involved in our community? And there's a dichotomy that we look at, or a framework, and one is through power politics, so anything that will make policy, anything that will get someone elected to office. And then there's non-power politics, which we call community engagement, working at a soup kitchen, for example. It's, for those of you familiar, Robert Dahl's Homo civicus, Homo politicus paradigm. That's what we look at. So what we did is we looked at the top 25 cities in terms of population, and we coded press releases to examine whether the mayors are encouraging people to get involved and what that looks like. And what we found out is that there is a great deal of community building activities, things like going to parades, anything that builds social capital, that mayors are indeed encouraging.
And mayors across party lines in different regions?
They're mostly Democrats because it's the top 25.
Oh, yeah.
But Mayor Ballard, for example, of Indianapolis was not an outlier. But across regions, there was no correlation with income level of the city. The only outlier was Detroit, because it's actually in their city charter that the mayor has to announce community meetings, I think on budgets, if I remember. So we had to treat that a little bit differently. But by and large, they're still talking more about ways to get involved in the community, more than you should go vote. Though the mayor of, I think it was the mayor of Albuquerque, actually encouraged people to call the city council over a budget bill, that was an outlier.
Sounds like something LaGuardia would have done.
Right.
May I ask a follow-up on this?
Certainly.
So one of the major themes of my first book was a connection between a changing role of government and popular political mobilization. One of the reasons people like FDR and LaGuardia were able to do what they could do is because citizens were taking so active a role in the political process. So when the current mayor of New York got elected a few years ago, I wrote a piece, an op-ed piece, saying the key to progressive politics basically is mobilizing people at the grassroots level. So my question for you is, what would you advise him to do? What can a mayor do to build the kind of social capital that will in turn redound to his political benefit or her political benefit?
This is how I explain questions like this to students. Winning an election is like putting together pieces of a puzzle.
Yeah. I call it a Frankenstein monster, but
that's fine.
Similar thing.
And on election day, you hope that your puzzle is bigger than your opponent's puzzle. Now, political scientists tend to think of urban politics and mayors in terms of regimes, and that's a loaded word that lots of scholars use differently. So here, it's what is your electoral coalition along with your governing coalition together? Let's just go with that. Stone would say something else, but let's just go with that. What he needs to do is make sure his base is secure. He needs to continue winning the election districts that he absolutely clobbered LaHoda in, like it was de Blasio 399, Adolfo Carrion 5, LaHoda 1. And he needs to consistently keep that base. Now, he also has to look at Queens, and because Queens, I can't remember how I worded this. if a Democrat in New York City wins Queens, they win the election. So Dinkins didn't win, so you can lose Queens if you're a Democrat and win the election, which happened,
not by very much.
I think only happened once, which was Dinkins' first election. But he lost because he was losing and he a few votes across a large number of districts. So he needs to make sure his base is secure at the very least, but he needs to expand that base. And a way to do that is to encourage civic participation and social capital in the areas of the city that he is strongest in. And essentially ignore the rest. Because that's the way this works. It's a terrible thing to say, but that's how real politics is. Now, he's a part of what we call a progressive regime, which is not a regime that business loves. So progressive regimes tend not to last long. And that's his issue, in my opinion.
You raised this notion of social capital and civic participation. Does Facebook count as a builder of social capital these days? It is the way in which many people come together. They come together in virtual communities that are without locality almost, rather than to meetings or to parades or to protest marches or anything else.
Is it social capital? There's a term political scientists use, I don't know if you guys use this, it's called checkbook participation, where are you participating because you're writing a check out to whatever organization you support. So I think social media as a tool, and certainly it's a powerful political tool if we look at, Libya and Egypt and so on. Maybe not Libya, but definitely Egypt. Does it count as participating? It depends. I don't think we should write it off as not participating. If you're getting people to do something because you create a Facebook page to go out and do something, then I think that counts. And you're certainly developing a relationship with your followers or what have you, or the people in your group or whatever. So I think it certainly should not be discounted.
I think it's a certain kind of social capital. In other words, it does some things well, it does other things not as well.
Right.
What it does well is make networks and make markets. It's very easy to share a story, to spread information, to raise small amounts of money. It's fantastic for those things. It's not quite as good at more difficult tasks that are going to require a lot of persistence, hierarchical organization over the long term.
Right.
So should we expect radical social change from social media? Well, it might help. Black Lives Matter is a remarkable social movement. It starts with social media. It doesn't end with social media. And so it becomes a tool in a broader, among others. The other thing it's doing is, and political scientists will tell us this, is encouraging ideological sorting.
Yes.
You read things that people of like mind post. You don't read things that people opposed to you post. And you're able to opt out of difficult conversations. And this seems to be one reason why social media is encouraging the trends that were already in place.
Right. Polarization.
Of polarization, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And I think, I was just commenting before the show that I haven't gone house to house doing any campaigning or anything like that, as I've done in other places in the past. Partly because this situation is so polarized that I'd rather not have some of those face-to-face conversations, and I think people would rather not have face-to-face conversations with me on some days either.
And public opinion scholars study this. There's this famous book called The Spiral of Silence, written by Elizabeth Noel Newman, oddly enough on Germany. That's where she's from, or she was from. And it's this study of whether, if you know you're in the minority, do you express your political opinions? Or do you not? You just keep it to yourselves. And I think in such a polarized environment, which to be fair, both sides are polarized, quite obviously. And there is no debate left among political scientists that the elites are polarized. And now there's far less debate that the general population is polarized. 10 years ago, different story. But now there is general consensus that we're a polarized nation on almost all fronts. Whether this vitriol, and I don't know what the role of Citizens United and SpeechNow.org versus the FEC plays in this, really is making us less likely to express our opinions on any level, for the reasons you just mentioned.
One of the nice things about BCTV is that we don't have political advertising on the air. So this is a whole half hour that people can watch without seeing an ad attacking one person or the other in this swing state that we inhabit. Television, of course, that's been around now for many decades, and that, of course, shapes the notion of community and the polity as well, in a way that hasn't been particularly helpful.
What was 1960, the presidential debate in 1960, that was the first time there was a presidential debate on TV? I'm
That's
asking
right.
this question. And at least
It was fuzzy and gray.
And the way we studied it is we were always taught that this made a difference, a big difference for JFK beating Nixon,
Right.
just because of the way he looked and his ability to articulate, which is
At least that was the first time that pundits imagined that they could interpret and spin the results of a debate in a way that was
Some
reasonable.
people now regard this as an urban legend, actually, as I understand.
that's what I'm asking you. Yeah, I'm not sure. You would know better than I.
So the evidence for this is one poll,
Okay.
basically, that didn't control for the. It turns out the radio listening audience was more Republican in the poll that they conducted, and so you've got a sort of biased sample. Doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Right.
It just means that the evidence for it has been taken as more definitive than I think probably is merited. This goes back a little longer than that, though. You've got the radio.
That's right.
One of the
Yeah,
first
which
great
is a different medium.
technologies
Yeah.
that does some of the same things that television has done in terms of forming a national political space and a direct connection between politicians and their followers. So.
And goes sort of straight into the head rather than
That's right.
flittering in front of the eyes. Well, we should have an hour-long show tonight, but unfortunately we have the usual half hour. I know that both of you are participating with some of your colleagues on October 9th. 19th, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
After the third presidential debate, and are going to unpack that. You're going to be instant experts and pundits in the wake of that show. So if the public wants to come hear more, they can see you there. And I know that every once in a while you've been mentioned in the Reading Eagle as well, so local Berks Countyans can
So what will you
sample
be
your
looking
opinions.
for in the election over the next week or so?
In the election, I'm waiting for more October surprises. I don't know what the whole WikiLeaks thing is going to do. I heard somebody, I don't know who it was, I've been obviously consuming a lot of news recently, suggest it will not be good for either candidate. Based on the polls I was looking at today, I don't see how Trump can go anywhere but up at the current moment. And I don't see him expanding his base right now. So what we're looking at is he going to expand his base, and what's that going to mean? So that's the big question, and I have absolutely no idea what the next few weeks are going to bring.
I think it's time to start looking down ticket too. The Senate is, if we have something of an idea of what is probably going to happen in the presidential race, the Senate is up for grabs. And that's obviously, with the Supreme Court vacancy waiting to be filled, a huge deal. And not just at the national level, state races, local races. These affect how governance works, And
Some
so
of the structural polarization is the result of lots of organizing on the local level and
Right,
the election
Right.
of state legislatures.
We do ourselves a disservice sometimes when we think purely of this one election. as
It's so easy
all
to live on
determinative.
the national level and imagine that we're only in one country, but we're also in municipalities and townships and counties and strangely shaped congressional
I
districts.
think you could trace some of the problems the Democrats have been having this past year to the fact that they have not paid enough attention
Right.
to what's
To
going
state
on.
legislative chambers in
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah.
Which
It's
will
the,
be interesting so the 2020 election, that's going to matter. Because
Yeah.
that's the group that will be
Redistricting,
that was the
right?
group
Yeah,
that will be
right,
redrawing all the
That's-
legislative districts.
That's a big part of the ballgame.
And
It
it's
really
really
is.
not that far off.
Currently, the BCTV studios are somewhere in Lancaster County, strangely enough, in terms of the congressional district. But it'll take some work to fix those institutionalized problems.
Mhm.
Great. Well, this has been completely fascinating and far more civil and analytical than many other programs that we might see on this current election. So thank you, Mason. Thank you, Michael, for being with me.
Thank you.
This has been great fun. Thank
Lots
you so
of
much
fun.
for having
Thank
us.
you.
Sure enough. And thank you all as well. We'll see you after the election in another edition of the Albright Scholar. Good night.
If you listen to the critics, if you listen to your own doubts and call them reasons, you may never find the drive to go back to school. But a little change in direction, a new perspective, and the right program may make your successful new path a reality. The Accelerated Degree Program at Albright College. Start your degree or complete your degree one night a week in as little as 2 years. Albright College, a different way of thinking.